It looked like the future. A sleek tri-jet with massive range, a high-tech glass cockpit, and enough power to conquer oceans. The MD-11 was built to be a world beater, the next generation of long-haul travel. But something went wrong, and despite all the innovation, this aircraft ended up abandoned by the very airlines it was built for, while pilots still reminisce about it like a legendary sports car. So what happened? Why did airlines turn their backs on the MD-11, even as pilots fell in love with it? Let's dive into the strange, turbulent story of one of aviation's most misunderstood aircraft. In the late 1980s, the aviation world was evolving, and fast. Twin jets were rising. Glass cockpits were replacing analog gauges. Airlines were demanding longer range, lower costs, and fewer crew. McDonnell Douglas, once a titan of aerospace innovation, was watching its influence slip. Their answer? Not a brand new design from scratch, but a bold reinvention of their most recognizable aircraft, the DC-10. They stretched the fuselage for more seats, redesigned the wings for better aerodynamics, swapped out the old, smoky JT9D engines for newer, more powerful GE CF6 turbofans. And most crucially, they modernized the cockpit, eliminating the need for a third crew member, the flight engineer. What emerged was the MD-11, a wide-body tri-jet with intercontinental range and a futuristic cockpit packed with cathode ray displays. It was elegant. It was powerful. It had global range. And it carried the legacy of McDonnell Douglas's long-haul family into the next decade. On paper, it looked like a winner. And in the beginning, many airlines agreed. Carriers like Delta, American, Swissair, and Finnair signed up early. McDonnell Douglas touted it as the perfect aircraft for the future, capable of flying from Los Angeles to Tokyo or from Europe to South America, all while offering lower operating costs than its predecessor. For McDonnell Douglas, the MD-11 wasn't just an airplane. It was a statement, a last stand, and maybe a lifeline. But sometimes, even the best-laid plans fall short once the wheels leave the ground. But once the MD-11 entered real-world service, the shine began to wear off. Fast. McDonnell Douglas had made bold promises. A range of over 7,000 nautical miles. Fuel burn 6% lower than the DC-10. Operating costs competitive with newer twin jets. All delivered in a sleek tri-jet package that still retained the redundancy of a third engine. It sounded like the perfect jet for the long-haul era. But when the first aircraft hit the ramp, airlines quickly discovered the numbers didn't match the marketing. The MD-11's advertised range? Only achievable under ideal conditions. Light loads, no headwinds, and a generous imagination. In actual operations, some carriers found they couldn't reliably reach even 6,500 nautical miles with a full passenger and cargo load. And that margin, those missing hundreds of miles, mattered. For long-haul routes like New York to Tokyo or Zurich to Hong Kong, that shortfall forced tough choices. Less cargo, fewer passengers, fuel stops that defeated the purpose of nonstop travel. Then came the fuel burn. McDonnell Douglas had promised improvements, but fuel consumption was still noticeably higher than hoped, especially compared to the new generation of long-range twins entering the scene. And those weren't the MD-11's only headaches. Reliability wasn't where it needed to be. Early models experienced avionics issues, center-of-gravity quirks, and some flight control complaints that rattled confidence among flight crews. While not unsafe, it just wasn't living up to expectations. And in the world of commercial aviation, expectations are everything. And while the MD-11 was falling short, the competition was surging ahead. Airbus had unveiled the A340, a four-engine long-haul jet with superior range and efficiency. And Boeing? They were already deep into development on the 777, a twin-engine wide-body that would become the new gold standard in long-haul aviation. The writing was on the wall. Why operate a tri-jet that struggled to meet its range targets, burned more fuel, and needed more maintenance, when Airbus and Boeing were offering clean-sheet designs that did more with less? The MD-11, once seen as a bold step into the future, was starting to look like the past. And yet, despite the performance shortfalls and business letdowns, there was one group who didn't just accept the MD-11. They loved it. The pilots. The MD-11 was, in every sense, a pilot's airplane. Not because it was easy, but because it demanded respect. It was long, heavy, complex, It flew fast and descended hard, and it had a reputation not just for power, but for personality. Pilots spoke of the massive center-mounted engine, that unmistakable General Electric CF6 perched at the tail, producing a high-pitched howl unlike anything else in the skies. Approaches in the MD-11 weren't just procedures, they were performances. And then there was the flight deck. Gone were the analog dials of the DC-10. In their place, glowing CRT screens, digital instruments, and a two-crew glass cockpit that felt closer to a fighter jet than a long-haul airliner. For the late 80s, this was futuristic. But there was no fly-by-wire here. No electronic buffer between the pilot and the aircraft. This was raw flying. All muscle memory and stick-and-rudder feel. And that's what pilots admired and feared. The MD-11 had quirks. It was notoriously sensitive in pitch. It flew with a high angle of attack, and it could quickly become unstable on final approach, especially if handled like a more forgiving Boeing or Airbus. Landing it well wasn't just a matter of autopilot finesse. It took experience, focus, and humility. Get it wrong, and the MD-11 would remind you who was in charge. Many pilots described it the same way, a beast that kept you honest. And like any beast, it had a bite. Mismanaged landings could end in hard touchdowns or bounced approaches. There were incidents, even accidents, enough that some airlines quietly tightened their training requirements or pulled the aircraft from high-demand routes altogether. But those who tamed it, they never forgot it. Because in a world of increasingly automated cockpits and gentle giants, the MD-11 stood alone as a challenge. A machine that rewarded mastery, punished arrogance, and left you with stories worth telling. Here's where things get complicated. Because for all its power, beauty, and pilot appeal, the MD-11 had a dark side. And it usually showed up at the very last moment of the flight. Landing the MD-11 was infamously difficult. This wasn't a mild quirk. It was a defining characteristic, and for some, a dangerous one. Why? Two design decisions, both intentional, would make landings one of the MD-11's most unforgiving challenges. First, the aircraft's center of gravity sat farther aft than most commercial airliners. It made the jet more efficient in cruise, but far more twitchy in the final seconds of flight. Second, its tailplane, the horizontal stabilizer, was smaller than what you'd find on similar-sized aircraft. That too was for efficiency, reduce drag, cut weight, save fuel. But together, these choices created a kind of aerodynamic paradox. The MD-11 was incredibly sensitive in pitch, but didn't offer much forgiveness. It was like landing a seesaw at 180 knots. Approaches demanded precision. Pilots had to manage descent rates and flare timing down to the second. Landing speeds? Typically 10 to 15 knots faster than something like a 777, putting you on the runway with less margin and more kinetic energy. And the flare window, that tiny zone where you transition from descent to touchdown, was razor thin. Too much flare? You'd float down the runway, earning precious space. Too little? You'd slam the main gear, hard. And if your vertical speed wasn't perfect, the MD-11 had a habit of bouncing violently. Sometimes, a minor bounce would lead to a porpoising motion, the aircraft pitching up and slamming down again, harder each time. More than a few landings ended with the tail contacting the ground, or worse. Flight crews knew this risk. Training was rigorous, and even seasoned pilots approached landings with caution. But accidents still happened. From FedEx in Narita to China Airlines in Hong Kong, the MD-11 developed a troubling reputation. Great in cruise, unpredictable on arrival. Some carriers issued memos. Others quietly reassigned the aircraft to routes with longer runways. And cargo operators? They took it with gallows humor. There was an old joke in the industry. If you haven't bounced it, you haven't landed it right. A laugh, but one with a warning. Because unlike other jets, the MD-11 demanded perfection, and it didn't give second chances. By the early 2000s, most passenger airlines had had enough. Delta, American, Swissair, one by one, they retired their MD-11s. But the aircraft wasn't done yet. Because in the world of cargo, the MD-11 found redemption. Cargo airlines didn't care as much about passenger comfort, cabin noise, or hard landings. What they saw was a powerful, long-range aircraft with a massive payload and great operating costs, especially since they could buy them cheap. FedEx, UPS, Lufthansa Cargo, they embraced the MD-11. In fact, many MD-11s are still flying cargo today, long after their passenger careers ended. But even in cargo, the last chapter of the MD-11 story, time is running out. The aircraft is aging, not just in years, but in relevance. Many of these jets are now 30-plus years old, flying thousands of cycles beyond what their designers ever imagined. And with each passing year, the writing on the wall becomes harder to ignore. Spare parts are scarce, maintenance is expensive, and newer alternatives, like the 777 freighter and upcoming A350F, offer better fuel burn, longer range, and fewer engines to maintain. For airlines running tight margins and tighter schedules, efficiency is everything. The MD-11, with its third engine and unique quirks, simply doesn't fit anymore. Even its most loyal operator, FedEx, once flying dozens, has started phasing them out. One by one, the purple and white tri-jets are being flown to retirement, parked in deserts, salvaged for parts, and slowly, silently forgotten. UPS is next. Others have already let go. The day is coming, soon, when you'll no longer hear that unmistakable center engine howl over a sleepy runway at sunrise. No more last-minute banked approaches. No more bounced landings in Memphis or Anchorage. The MD-11's era is closing. And yet, for all its flaws, it leaves behind a complicated legacy. Loved by pilots, tolerated by airlines, redeemed by cargo. The MD-11 was never perfect, not by a long shot. But it was never boring either. It dared to push beyond its predecessor. It carried passengers, freight, and even criticism with the same defiant spirit. And long after it's grounded for good, there will be those who still talk about it, the way a pilot talks about a stubborn airplane that made them better. Because some aircraft you fly, and some aircraft teach you to fly. That was the MD-11. In an era of twin-engine dominance and optimized efficiency, the MD-11 stands out like a muscle car in a parking lot full of hybrids. Loud, fast, quirky, imperfect, but unforgettable. So here's the question for you. Was the MD-11 ahead of its time, or simply a beautiful mistake? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us. Did you ever fly on one, or land one? If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold aviation stories. Until next time, blue skies.